The Man with No Past. The town of Wayland, nestled in the wooded arms of rural America, was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened, until it did. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. So when Ezekiel Black moved into the abandoned Wilkins house on the edge of town, people whispered, but never loudly. He was quiet, well-mannered, and paid in cash. A man in his 40s with deep-set eyes, pale skin, and a voice that could calm a storm or stir one. He never went to church, never attended town meetings, and never shopped during the day. No one saw him eat. No one saw him smile. But he was polite. And in small towns, that's usually enough to avoid questions. What no one knew, what they couldn't possibly guess, was that Ezekiel wasn't just a loner. He was a practitioner of an ancient form of black magic, not the kind you read about in books or see in horror films. This was older, rawer, darker, something he had learned from an underground cult operating in the shadows of Eastern Europe during his youth. He had made a pact there, bound not in ink, but blood, and something had followed him back. It wasn't human. It had no name in modern languages, but Ezekiel called it Vel Shara, meaning the tongue of the hollow. It was an entity of lust, hunger, and domination, an evil spirit that fed on life energy, especially from women. Through the rituals Ezekiel had mastered, Vel Shara granted him the power to draw women to him, physically, emotionally, even spiritually, and enslaved their minds. His small house had a secret. On the second floor, behind a locked door and hidden beneath a false wall, was a chamber. No one ever entered that room except for Ezekiel and the women who would never be seen again. The first disappearance was Monica Reed, a college student visiting her parents during winter break. She was known to be happy, social, and full of life. But after a trip to the grocery store one snowy evening, she vanished. Her car was found parked normally, engine off, keys inside. She was the first. By the time the third woman disappeared, the town was uneasy, but there were no connections, different backgrounds, different ages, no evidence, no struggle. Police chalked it up to runaway cases, maybe even trafficking. No one suspected Ezekiel. The women didn't scream, they didn't fight. When Vel Shara took over, they went willingly. Inside the ritual room, lit by candles made of animal fat and etched with symbols older than civilization, Ezekiel would chant in a tongue long forgotten. The spirit would enter the woman's mind, take control of her desires, her voice, her body. For days, she'd be his. But the spirit's hunger didn't stop at control. It needed more. Each possession ended the same way. When the body could no longer withstand the corruption, the soul would be devoured and the body would die. By the time 6 women had disappeared, whispers of a serial killer began to circulate. But Ezekiel was careful. He always burned the remains, mixed ashes with dirt, and spread them across the woods in secret. That is, until the 7th girl. Rachel Morgan was different. A 24-year-old school teacher, spiritual and intuitive, sensitive to energies, raised by a grandmother who believed in cleansing rituals and protective charms. She had once even claimed to see spirits as a child, though she kept that hidden as she grew older. Ezekiel spotted her one rainy afternoon in town. She was buying herbs from a local store, sage, lavender, rosemary, a strange purchase in a town that didn't care much for such things. He was intrigued. Vel Shara whispered eagerly in his mind, drawn to her energy. "She's strong," it hissed. "We must break her." Ezekiel smiled faintly and followed. Over the next week, Rachel began having dreams. Shadows in her room, a voice calling her name. She would wake up in cold sweats, heart pounding, windows open though she remembered closing them. At work, she found herself distracted, hearing whispers when no one was around. One night, she dreamt of a man standing at the edge of her bed, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. When she woke up, there was a faint black symbol drawn in soot on her window pane. She told her friend, Alyssa, about the dreams, the strange feelings, the whispers. Alyssa shrugged it off. "You've just been stressed." But Rachel knew it was something more. Something was trying to get inside. What she didn't know was that the spirit had already marked her. The ritual had begun. All that remained was the final step, getting her to Ezekiel's house. The next night, Rachel found herself wandering, unaware, barefoot, in the middle of the night. She didn't even know how she'd gotten out of bed. She walked 2 miles through dark woods and ended up on Ezekiel's porch, eyes wide but vacant. He opened the door, smiling as he stepped aside. "You're ready," he whispered. Inside, the ritual room was prepared, the candles flicking, the mark of Vel Shara. Rachel stumbled forward as if invisible strings pulled her. Her bare feet touched the cold, stained wood of Ezekiel's ritual chamber, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was trapped in a thick, murky fog where distant whispers lulled her into obedience. Ezekiel closed the heavy door behind her and turned the iron lock with a soft, final click. Candles lined the walls, dripping black wax. The air was dense with the metallic scent of blood and burning herbs. Ancient symbols etched into the floor seemed to pulse with life, breathing in time with the low hum that filled the room. Rachel stood in the center of the markings, swaying slightly. Ezekiel circled her like a vulture, murmuring words in a language older than human memory. His hands moved through the air, tracing sigils of command and ownership. Velshara stirred, the entity's hunger vibrating against the thin veil, separating their world from its own. "You belong to me now," Ezekiel whispered, his voice trembling with ecstasy. He raised a rusted dagger, its blade inscribed with runes of possession. With a swift motion, he pricked Rachel's palm, drawing a bead of blood. As her blood touched the floor, the symbols ignited with a sickly green light. Rachel gasped. For a fraction of a second her eyes cleared, pure terror flashing through them. She realized where she was, what she was about to become. "No," she croaked, her voice barely audible. But Vel Shara surged forward, sinking into her soul with a force that made the very air crackle. Rachel screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the darkness. Her body convulsed, knees hitting the floor, fingers clawing at the wooden boards. Ezekiel watched, smiling, as the possession completed. He could feel Vel Shara bonding with her, weaving through her mind and soul like barbed wire. When she stood, her eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. "Come," he commanded. Rachel obeyed, hollow and silent. For hours, he used her the way he had used the others, taking whatever he wanted, bending her to his will while the spirit inside her fed hungrily on her life force. But something was different this time. Velshara didn't fully dominate her. Rachel's spiritual strength, the protective blessings buried deep within her, created a resistance, a tiny ember that refused to extinguish. And now it smoldered. By dawn, Ezekiel sat, slumped against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. Rachel knelt on the floor across from him, motionless, her hair tangled, her skin pale. And then she spoke. "You're not the master," she said, her voice layered with 2 tones, hers and something much, much deeper. Ezekiel frowned. Velshara shrieked inside his mind. "She fights! She burns! Stop her!" But it was too late. Rachel's body spasmed violently, her hands twisted into unnatural positions, and her mouth gaped open as if releasing a silent scream. The candles flickered madly, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. The spirit was losing its grip. Ezekiel lunged forward to restrain her, but Rachel's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with inhuman strength. He howled in pain as his skin blistered where she touched him. Through gritted teeth, Rachel forced herself to speak an old prayer her grandmother had taught her, a prayer of cleansing, of banishment. "Velshara, by the light of the old ways I cast you out." The room exploded in chaos. The spirit shrieked, the sound shattering every window in the house. The sigils on the floor cracked and burned. Ezekiel staggered back, clutching his head as Velshara's influence was violently severed. Rachel collapsed, unconscious, her body trembling. It was in that moment of confusion that her hand, still slick with blood, found her phone hidden beneath the folds of a torn blanket. With her last ounce of strength, she pressed the emergency call button. 911. The Wayland Police Department received the call at 5:12 a.m. The dispatcher heard only muffled cries and a man's voice screaming in an unknown language before the line went dead. Within minutes, officers were dispatched to the location traced from the call. They arrived to find Ezekiel's house ominously silent, the front door slightly ajar, a bitter cold leaking from inside. Guns drawn, they entered. The stench of burnt flesh and herbs hit them immediately. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing the horror of the ritual chamber. Symbols charred into the wood, black candles melted into grotesque shapes, and blood, so much blood, splattered across the floor. And there, lying on the ground, was Rachel. She was alive, barely breathing, covered in scratches and burns. Beside her, Ezekiel crouched like a wounded animal, muttering to himself, his nails clawing at the floor. "Stay back!" he roared when the officers approached. "You don't understand. It's still here. It's hungry." They tackled him to the ground, cuffed him despite his violent thrashing. It took 6 men to drag him out of the way. 10 years had passed since the horrors in Wayland. The town had done its best to forget, to seal away the memory of Ezekiel Black and the 6 women who were lost. The Wilkins house stood empty, shrouded in ivy and silence, its windows boarded and its front door nailed shut. Most avoided it altogether. Even kids on dares wouldn't go near. But evil doesn't die. It waits. Rachel Morgan had moved far from Wayland, changed her name, built a quiet life in Maine, and taught art at a small private school. No one there knew her past. To them, she was calm, composed, even cheerful. But every mirror in her house was covered at night. She refused to sleep in complete darkness. And she always wore a silver charm around her neck, a protective sigil passed down from her grandmother. The nightmares had stopped, mostly, until last week. It began with a letter, no return address. The envelope was blank, pure white. But inside, the paper was black, and the ink, there was none. Just faint etchings, invisible to the eye. She only noticed the words when they began to whisper. She dropped it the second it hissed her name. Vel Shara. She burned the letter in her fireplace, watching it curl and vanish in flame. But that night, her dreams returned, except they weren't dreams. She was back in the ritual chamber. The candles burned, the symbols pulsed. But this time, Ezekiel was not there. Only Velshara stood, not in shadow, but in form. It was taller than any human, its limbs bending the wrong way, its face blank save for the wide slit of a mouth that stretched ear to ear. "You opened the door," it said. "You remember me. That's enough." Rachel screamed herself awake. The walls of her bedroom were vibrating softly, as if they too had heard the voice. Meanwhile, in Wayland, a new family had moved into the house next to the Wilkins property. The Chambers, a young couple with a 9-year-old daughter, Ellie. They were new to the area and didn't believe in small-town superstitions. One day, Ellie wandered too close to the old house. She didn't go inside, just stood at the gate, staring at the front door. She swore later that someone whispered to her through the boards, "Would you like to play?" That night, Ellie sleepwalked for the first time in her life. Her mother found her standing outside at 2 a.m., barefoot, staring directly at the Wilkins house. "I have a new friend," she said softly. "He lives in the cracks." The next night, Ellie woke up screaming. She said something with a long face and no eyes had crawled out of the wall in her room. And then the voices started, every night, growing louder. The parents dismissed it as imagination, nightmares from moving stress. But Ellie's drawings told another story. She kept sketching the same creature, tall, thin, with a bleeding mouth and fingers like thorns. At the bottom of each page, she wrote a word she had never heard before. Vel Shara. Rachel knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She returned to Wayland. She stood before the house she swore she'd never see again. It looked smaller now, but darker somehow, as if it had sunken into the ground. Inside, she could still feel it, its presence. It hadn't died with Ezekiel. His body was gone, but Velshara had remained, waiting, feeding on the energy the house absorbed over the years, rage, fear, grief. Ellie had simply awakened what had been dormant. Rachel visited the Chambers family under the pretense of being a paranormal researcher. She examined Ellie's drawings, spoke with her, and confirmed what she feared most. Velshara was trying to possess the child. It had learned. It had grown more clever. It was no longer forcing its way in. It was luring. That night, Rachel performed her first ritual in 10 years. She didn't have Ezekiel's tools, but 3 months had passed since Rachel sealed Velshara back into the dark veins of the Wilkins house. Wayland returned to its sleepy silence. The Chambers family moved away, grateful but shaken. Rachel herself returned to Maine, convinced that at last the nightmare had ended. But evil adapts. It waits, watches, and learns. What Rachel didn't know was that the final ritual, the one that sealed Velshara, had been recorded, not by her, but by an old, forgotten surveillance system still embedded deep within the Wilkins house, hidden cameras installed by Ezekiel himself years ago. They were never wired to the police or cloud. Instead, they backed up locally to a weathered, dust-covered hard drive buried under the floorboards. A group of urban explorers found it. 4 teenagers, YouTube ghost hunters, looking for clicks, had broken into the Wilkins house. They filmed themselves exploring the ruined halls, pretending to be scared, laughing nervously, mocking the legends, until one of them, Jake, tripped over a loose board in the ritual chamber. They pulled up the planks expecting rats or hidden trinkets. They found the old hard drive. "Yo, this thing's ancient," one said. "Plug it in. Let's see if there's ghost porn or something." They laughed, but they took it home. And when they uploaded the files, the last recorded footage played. It showed Rachel's ritual, the blood, the chanting, the appearance of Velshara, the seal. But the audio wasn't just captured. It was absorbed, encoded. Velshara's final scream became something new, a digital echo. The next day, Jake uploaded the footage to their channel under the title, Real Exorcism Footage, Black Magic House in Wayland. It went viral overnight. The scream, just 32 seconds long, became a TikTok trend. People used the sound as a creepy background for filters, for jokes, for horror skits. But something happened to those who used it. Not all of them. Just a few. Enough to notice. First came the whispers. Then the mirrors started fogging from the inside. Some began waking up with symbols drawn on their arms. One girl, a TikToker named Lana, was found sleepwalking toward the train tracks, barefoot, eyes rolled back. Another, a boy in Ohio, was found screaming at his laptop, trying to claw at his screen, shouting, "Get out! Get out of me!" The scream had become a conduit. The digital age had given Velshara a new doorway. Rachel heard about it from a student. A quiet, gothic teen showed her the video in class, jokingly asking, "Hey, Miss M, you ever do one of these exorcisms?" Rachel froze. Her skin turned pale. The footage was too familiar. It was her face, her voice, her battle. But the scream, she heard it clearly. It wasn't just a sound, it was alive. Rachel left class without a word. That night, she re-watched the video in private. She slowed it down, enhanced the waveform, and realized the horrible truth. Velshara had infected the audio file. People who listened closely, especially those sensitive, vulnerable, or spiritually open, became beacons for the entity. He was no longer trapped. He was spreading. Desperate, Rachel reached out to an old contact, Father Dorian, a former priest turned occult scholar. He lived off-grid now, deep in Vermont, surrounded by ancient books and relics. When Rachel explained, Dorian listened carefully, then nodded. There are spirits that travel through the air, through water, through blood, but only the rarest can travel through sound, he said grimly. Velshara is one of the few who can transform from echo to entity. How do we stop it? Rachel asked. Dorian leaned forward. You must seal the sound. Rachel returned to Wayland one last time. She entered the Wilkins house alone, carrying a laptop, an old microphone blessed with sacred oil, and a recording of Velshara's scream. She also brought a rare item Dorian gave her, the dagger of silencing, forged from silver, etched with runes meant to sever sonic bindings. In the ritual chamber, she began a new spell, not to banish, but to mute, to silence Velshara forever. The scream echoed through the speakers. The house trembled, the sigils relit, and then it spoke again. You brought me back, Velshara said. You gave me power. You made me famous. It laughed, a horrible glitching laugh, as if torn from a corrupted audio file. You can't silence the internet, Rachel. I'm already viral. Rachel stepped into the circle, gripping the dagger. You're not a god, she whispered. You're a parasite. And she stabbed the silver blade into the heart of the speaker, just as the scream hit its peak. The effect was instantaneous. A shockwave of absolute silence rippled outward, candles extinguished, the walls groaned, the screen went black. Velshara screamed without sound, his mouth stretching wider and wider until he imploded into nothing. The video was deleted, automatically wiped.